Final girls. They're a staple of the horror genre and have been fighting back against evil for generations. From the lone survivors of the earliest slasher movies to superstar heroes that anchor generations of films, final girls come in many forms. But they all have something in common. They make it to the end of the movie and give us someone to cheer for when all hope seems lost. And today, I'm going to rank the 13 greatest final girls in horror history. Before we begin, here's a few ground rules for my choices. While none of this is mathematical because, frankly, what even are numbers, I have a few criteria of how these final girls are ranked. So obviously, they have to be women. Maybe a final guys list someday? Oh, who am I kidding? It's just Ash Williams 13 times. And they have to be one of the last people standing. Now, they don't necessarily have to be the only survivor, but they have to wind up being the protagonist of the story. Also, they don't have to necessarily be alive when the credits roll. Plenty of horror movies end with a final jump scare or reveal that implies our heroine dies just after the movie ends. As for why some are ranked higher than others, kicking ass and being an awesome character is easily the biggest reason why. But the harder the challenge they face, the better a final girl they are. Finally, the more sequels a final girl is in, the better they often rank. What's better than beating a killer or a monster with the odds stacked against you? Doing it again and again and again. But if a great final girl gets killed in a sequel, no big deal. You can't lose the points you already gained in the cruel, cruel world of horror movies. Given that the nature of being a final girl means being the last one standing, or at least making it to the end of the story, this is your final warning that there will be plenty of spoilers to follow. And now, let the horror begin. At 13, Constance from Just Before Dawn, played by Deborah Benson and appearing in just this one hidden gem. We start off our list with a less discussed slasher, but one of my favorites. Just Before Dawn is a fantastic deep woods horror that sees a group of friends travel deep into the forest when one of them has inherited a plot of land. And as if the woods aren't dangerous enough, they're picked off one by a killer connected to an isolated family. And this is where Constance comes in. For most of the movie, Constance is petrified and essentially immobilized by the growing fear of being hunted, leaving it up to her boyfriend Warren and park ranger Roy to fight back. That is, until the very end of the film where, with Roy gone and Warren injured by the twin killers, Constance finally snaps and frees herself from her fear. It's the long delayed transformation of a terrified character into the final girl. Not just stopping the killer, but dispatching him in the craziest way I might have ever seen in a slasher. Ramming her entire fist down his throat and choking the big bastard to death. Insane, but so satisfying. In the end, the wounded Warren's emotional breakdown and Constance's transformation and strength deep within the lonesome wilderness gives me the chills. It's dark, it's shocking, and it balances the human survival instinct with a sense of inescapable inner darkness that really resonates. At 12, Dana Polk from The Cabin in the Woods, played by Kristen Connolly and only appearing in this film because it would be kinda hard to make a sequel. Maybe the most clearly defined final girl, The Cabin in the Woods sees a group of friends travel to, well, you know where, and it's quickly revealed the entire horror scenario is controlled by an agency that selects a group of people to sacrifice to the elder gods once a year to keep the world safe. Dana is our designated final girl, being manipulated into the role as her friends die one by one. But Dana is one of the best because she ultimately breaks the system, not just surviving the zombie redneck torture family, but making it into the underground facility with her stoner friend and unleashing chaos in easily the best scene in the movie. Now, it's not just about surviving the night, but taking revenge on all the people that killed her friends and celebrated it. Dana doesn't rank higher on the list because she does, in the end, let the entire world be destroyed. Dying at the end of your movie hurts your final girl status, but causing the apocalypse is a much bigger deduction. At 11, Beth from Evil Dead Rise, played by Lily Sullivan and currently only starring in this latest entry in the franchise. If you're anything like me, and I know I am, you gotta put some Evil Dead on this list. I'd briefly considered Mia from the 2013 reboot, remake, whatever, but seeing as she's a deadite or incapacitated for most of the movie, I couldn't quite see her making the cut. Get it? Cut. She loses her hand. On the other hand, I'll stop. I really enjoyed 2023's Evil Dead Rise and thought that Lily Sullivan's Beth was an excellent addition to the franchise, with our heroine locked in close quarters with her deadite sister and fighting to save what remains of her family. And Beth doesn't just physically suffer, she's emotionally tormented, with her own impending motherhood contrasted against her sister becoming one hell of a mother. Alyssa Sutherland may get all the fun, crazy, evil lines as Ellie, but it's Sullivan's Beth that makes you fully emotionally invested in the madness. By the end, Evil Dead Rise is a feel-good, pump-your-fist kind of horror movie, and my preferred mode for Evil Dead, with Beth feeling like a more emotional and connected version of Ash. I mean, come on, a badass woman with a chainsaw and shotgun? This movie's speaking my language. Right now, there are several Evil Dead films planned, but not any details. I'd love for Beth to return, becoming the new heroic anchor for a quickly expanding universe of Deadites. At 10, Grace Lee Dumas, although I think she won't be keeping the new last name, from Ready or Not, played by the modern GOAT Samara Weaving, and appearing in one film, although they might be making a sequel. If a great final girl is defined by how difficult it is to survive for an entire film, Grace has the odds stacked against her for the entire runtime. The story of a new bride who is hunted by her in-laws in a twisted game of hide-and-seek, Ready or Not is like a playground break with real high stakes, with the writer-director team of Radio Silence getting the hunt going pretty fast, and playing it out across the majority of the movie. Twists, turns, allies, betrayals. Grace is having to navigate the already difficult process of becoming a new member of a family, with that same family hunting her with crossbows, guns, and swords inside a giant, and very cool, mansion. Grace also takes a hell of a beating throughout this movie, and Weaving does an amazing job at playing the physical toll on her character, while also still making this film genuinely just as funny as it is tense. Sure, not every family member is exactly skilled at the whole hunting and killing business, but the numbers and lack of familiarity with the home are against Grace. It all leads to a blood-splattered finale, and one of the great final lines in horror. At 9, Ginny Field from Friday the 13th Part 2, played by Amy Steele in this one entry of the franchise. Now, for being a classic slasher franchise that is defined by the structure and stakes of the subgenre, I don't think there are many Friday survivors that would classify as a great final girl. Really, the best hero in the franchise is Tommy Jarvis, but that's a character for another list. However, my favorite final girl from Friday the 13th is easily Ginny, our camp counselor assistant and child psychology student helping to start a new summer camp on the shores of Crystal Lake. Well, you probably already know that doesn't go according to plan, as Jason Voorhees makes his first full appearance to spoil the fun. But given that Ginny already knows a little about Jason and is interested in his trauma, she has a leg up on the, at this point, very human killer. Of course, most of her friends are picked off before she's aware of what's happening, but essentially the entire third act is one long chase and fight, culminating in Ginny posing as the dead Pamela Voorhees to trick Jason into a machete attack. What happens to Ginny by the end of Friday the 13th Part 2? I really don't know what the hell is going on, and none of the other entries in this franchise resolve this at all. Still, Ginny is the most interesting of the bunch thanks to her resourcefulness and her proactive fight to survive, where so many others simply stumble to the end. At 8, Erin Harson from You're Next, played by Sharni Vinson in this standalone slasher. You're Next has all the makings of a typical home invasion slasher, with a family reunion dinner being so rudely interrupted by the arrival of a group of hired mask killers in animal masks. All the odds are against the family, who aren't prepared and don't realize that one of them has set up this trap. That is, until Erin, girlfriend and unlikely guest, reveals she grew up in a survivalist compound and is extremely deadly. What follows is a game of cat and mouse, with Erin steadily and brutally turning the tables on her hunters. And while I think that You're Next is good but not great, it's really elevated by Vincent as Erin, who is essentially the reason for this entire film existing. Without a final girl who's so completely out of the league of our killers, You're Next wouldn't be much more than a mumblecore take on a single location slasher. Instead, it's a satisfying watch for anyone that's tired of seeing their final girls barely survive the night, and instead really take it to the killers. At 7, Sarah Connor from The Terminator, played by Linda Hamilton and appearing in 4 films and a TV show, but not all of those are in canon with one another, and some might erase the others, but that all depends on how you view time travel in the Terminator franchise, and also there's a few other actresses, and Jesus, let's just get on with it. So with all that preamble, what's really important to understand is that James Cameron's original The Terminator is absolutely a slasher and is taking a huge amount of inspiration from Halloween, and using it to translate a massive future sci-fi robot apocalypse into a much smaller budget modern day story. And one of the things I really love about that first movie is how well it balances its sci-fi concepts, love story between Sarah and Kyle, and what is essentially a movie-long chase. And it's really the story of Sarah becoming the strong woman she's destined to be to raise John Connor into a future leader. By the end, with Kyle killed trying to stop Arnie's now fully stop-motion T-800, it's only Sarah that can stop him for good with a conveniently placed hydraulic press.
You're a terminated fucker.
From there, Cameron upgrades Sarah into the deadly and mentally unstable action heroine of T2, although she is essentially sharing the co-lead spot with Arnie and Edward Furlong as young John. Still, it's a really compelling evolution for the character, with her knowledge of the coming apocalypse driving her mad. Sarah returns as a rebooted time traveler in Genesis and a grizzled old warrior in Dark Fate. And Lena Headey creates a more complex character in the sadly unfinished Sarah Connor Chronicles. But nothing really lasts in the mind like the original Terminator's vision of a haunted survivor waiting on a terrible future. Man, I love the Terminator. At 6, Sienna Shaw from Terrifier, played by Lauren Levera and appearing in 2 films and counting. The newest addition to this list, Levera's Sienna Shaw is the only one seemingly capable of killing the demonic Art the Clown, walking the fine line between traumatized survivor and mythical badass. And while Sienna isn't introduced until Terrifier 2, she's what makes these movies so good. Honestly, I don't really care for the first Terrifier, but Levera's performance in 2 and 3 adds an emotional weight and a hardcore fighter we care about that counterbalances all the hyper-gore these movies are famous for. After a first film with basically no interesting characters and no happy ending, Terrifier 2 introduces us to Sienna, a young woman getting ready for Halloween and becoming the angelic warrior her deceased father once designed. But an encounter with Art and the need to save her brother turns her into a warrior, complete with a holy sword. Terrifier 3 follows up on Sienna trying to overcome her trauma, only to face Art once again. And in both instances, the films climax in a brutal, kick-ass fight of good versus evil. With Art the Clown one of the most sadistic and unstoppable slashers in modern film, Sienna rises to become an awesome hero to save the day. With at least Terrifier 4 on the way, there's still more to come for Sienna's story, including probably a trip to hell. If it's anything like the last 2, I could easily see Sienna rising even higher on this list. At 5, Nancy Thompson from A Nightmare on Elm Street, played by Heather Langenkamp and appearing in 3 films and a remake, but that definitely doesn't count. What's worse than a killer chasing you around your quiet suburban home with a butcher's knife? One that's waiting for you in your dreams. When it comes to the Elm Street franchise, Freddy Krueger is the star, and they probably leaned into that a little too much by the end, but Nancy Thompson is easily the best of the franchise's final girls as the only person that realizes a dream killer is behind a string of deaths, and then as the returning hero that helps a new generation fight him once again. And since so much of Freddy's hunt takes place where he is all-powerful, Nancy is a very vulnerable heroine throughout her films, not just powerless in her dreams, but quickly running out of time. Nancy's plan to pull Freddy out of the dream world and into a booby-trapped home is almost a cliche now, but it's a great way to undercut a villain that was still in his most terrifying form. And while Langenkamp is playing herself in Wes Craven's meta-horror of New Nightmare, I still count it as part of Nancy's arc, as this story of an actress pulled into the horror of a movie she starred in has her ultimately assume the mantle of Nancy to stop this new demon Freddy. I really think it's great, most of all for Heather's journey as a mom saving her son, giving Nancy a happy ending she couldn't have in the films before. I just really love New Nightmare, guys. At 4, Kirsty Cotton from Hellraiser, played by Ashley Lawrence and appearing in 3.1 films. As far as opponents go, interdimensional torture demons are pretty stiff competition, but in the Hellraiser films, they aren't the only villains that Kirsty Cotton has to survive. The original Hellraiser is equally the story of Julia, the wife who helps resurrect the demon-killed brother-in-law she had an affair with, as it is the story of Kirsty, her stepdaughter who discovers Julia and Frank's evil plans and stumbles into the clutches of the Cenobites. But Kirsty is very cunning and is able to turn the tables on both humans and demons alike. As if that weren't bad enough, Hellbound, Hellraiser 2, you know a sequel kicks ass when the subtitle comes before the main title, is like the Super Mario Bros. 2 of Hellraiser movies. Now, Kirsty is targeted by a real fucked up doctor and ends up going to hell to stop our villains in what is essentially a fairy tale for dang-ass freaks. Through it all, Kirsty is a final girl that outsmarts the creatures that target her, playing one side against the other and managing to stay a good person even when surrounded by madness and evil. Wearing your enemy's skin to kill a hell god is pretty next level when it comes to final girl strategies. Kirsty is also briefly in part 3 and comes back for part 6. But I'm already supposed to talk about these films in a retrospective, so please spare me the extra pain. At 3, Ellen Ripley from Alien, played by Sigourney Weaver and appearing in 4 films if you count a genetically spliced clone. The thing about Ellen Ripley is that this is a character that very quickly evolves away from categorization as a final girl, really only being able to be categorized as one in Ridley Scott's original Alien because that film has the same structure as a slasher, just with a monster, adult space truckers, and a spaceship. There, Ripley is almost the surprise main character, with the film not telegraphing her as the central character until the midpoint. But her intelligence and courage under pressure are the clear reasons why she survives the ultimate killing machine, making for a super satisfying surprise 4th act in the escape ship. From there, Ripley goes through a similar evolution as Sarah Connor thanks to James Cameron's Aliens. And this is where I think Sigourney Weaver turns her into one of the best horror characters of all time. The reveal of Ripley as a mother that missed out on her daughter's life, her new connections with Newt and Hicks, the way she steps up when the Marines fall, and the climactic battle with the Xenomorph Queen absolutely kick ass. It's one woman versus maybe the most dangerous enemy on this entire list. Post-Aliens, the tragedy of Alien 3 turns Ripley into a dark martyr, while Alien Resurrection makes her an action star. Neither are as good as the first two, but they both further cement Ellen Ripley as an icon, and a character that, while vulnerable and haunted, is someone you'd want on your side when facing the worst dangers in the universe. At 2, Laurie Strode from Halloween, played by Jamie Lee Curtis and appearing in 7 films that take place in different timelines, plus 2 reboot movies, but we're really not counting those, and Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 is good, dang it. Maybe the quintessential final girl and the one that fits the description most clearly on this list, Laurie Strode really sets the mold in John Carpenter's original Halloween for both good and bad. The good is that Laurie is a very well-defined character and Curtis does a great job at playing her. A girl targeted by a killer for no fault of her own and desperately fighting to survive. The bad is that she is oblivious to the danger all around her until the climax, which doesn't really do her any favors as a survivor. And she makes all the cliché mistakes that often define typical slashers. But given that Laurie returns in so many more stories, she gets the chance to turn that around. Halloween 2 has her unconscious for quite a while until the finale, but H2O is a great conclusion to her story, bringing Curtis back 20 years later as a haunted and alcoholic Laurie, who finally puts an end to her brother's rampage. And really, is there any slasher death as satisfying as seeing Laurie chop Michael's head off? Don't worry about Resurrection. Instead, jump to the David Gordon Green modern trilogy for another elevation of Laurie's character. Especially 2018, because honestly, these movies kind of become like a Ric Flair retirement tour, with a heavily armed survivalist Laurie battling Michael 40 years later while trying to reconnect with her estranged family. The finale in Laurie's booby-trapped home is a fantastic inversion of the original, and while I'm not a fan of kills or ends, you don't get too many final girls that get to destroy their boogeyman so many times. Laurie really is the heart of the Halloween franchise, and there's only one that beats her in longevity and satisfying story arcs. But before we get to our top entry, here's a few honorable mentions that just missed the list. Gale Weathers in the Scream series, Taylor Gentry from The Rise of Leslie Vernon, Meg Penny from The Blob, Susie Bannion from Suspiria, Mary Beth Dunstan from the Hatchet movies, Jay Height from It Follows, Mia from Evil Dead 2013, Tree Gelbman from the Happy Death Day movies, Michelle from 10 Cloverfield Lane, and Sarah from The Descent, and I guess The Descent Part 2. And at number 1, the greatest final girl in horror history, Sidney Prescott from Scream, played by Neve Campbell and appearing in 5 movies and counting. First of all, Sidney has a great character arc, both on a film-by-film basis and across the entire Scream franchise. With the original Scream opening with Sidney already haunted by the murder of her mother a year earlier, Wes Craven's film is weaving a lot of trauma and darkness into its lead character beneath all the fun meta-horror references. And Scream 1 through 3 are eventually about Sidney finding out the full truth behind her mother's death. making peace with it, and learning to trust others. Individually, Sydney has to beat 2 psychotic high schoolers, one of the killer's moms and her accomplice, and her secret brother, who all love to mentally torment her and stab her friends. Eventually, Sydney has to deal with another killer relative in Scream 4, and a new generation of killers and final girls in Scream 5. But Sydney is essentially already a legendary final girl by the end of the original movie, and each following movie only adds to that legend. Not bad for Wes Craven creating 2 of the best final girls ever. Some final girls just have the bad luck of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Others become mortal enemies with a villain after several films. But Sydney is constantly being directly targeted by masked killers that are manipulating her personal life and trying to stab her every few days. Still, Sydney comes out on top, and man is she ruthless when it comes down to killing the bad guy. I guess enough times being targeted by psychopaths means you don't fuck around when it's time to put them down. Lately, the Scream series has become kind of a mess behind the scenes, with Campbell not returning for 6 over pay disputes, and then new stars Melissa Barrera and Jenna Ortega not coming back for 7. And I really have no idea what the future will have in store for Sydney and the rest of the Ghostface killers, but Sydney's status as the greatest final girl in horror is set in stone. And with that, we've come to the end of our list and a look back at some of the greatest characters in horror history. If you like this video, let me know, because I'd love to make rankings of the best final guys, monsters, slasher killers, and more. But the final girl will always have an irreplaceable part in horror history, showing us that saving the day and surviving when all hope seems lost is still possible. Thanks for watching today's video, and the first horror list I've done in a little while. If you've been following the channel for a while, you know that I've done previous lists on unsung slasher movies twice, unsung monster movies, and the 31 best movies for the Halloween season. And I just really love making horror lists. They're really fun. So lately I was thinking about making another one, and I thought I would do something a little more unconventional. I've talked about final girls in various forms through the different horror retrospectives I've done over the years, but it's fun to do one just on this character type, and talk about some of my favorite characters in horror. The top few probably aren't any surprise, but how can you really beat Laurie Strode or Sidney Prescott? I mean, there's a reason why they're always on these lists. As of the making of this video, Scream 7 is in pre-production, and there's a lot of talks about another Halloween movie, maybe even with Laurie Strode coming back. Please don't. And of course there's Terrifier 4 still to come. So it's clear that there's still plenty of stories left for our favorite final girls. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what makes a great final girl and your own rankings of the best final girls in horror history, because there are a lot to choose from. As always, a thank you to my patrons and members for their continued support. And if you'd like to support the channel, it's only $2 a month for early access to every video and exclusive reviews, with the latest being a look back on the Back to the Future trilogy. So until next time, I hope that you're taking care of yourselves and taking some inspiration from our favorite final girls.